Hey everyone, welcome back. I just wanted to share a little bit about where I'm at in my mushroom farming adventure. I've reached the stage where I'm producing mushrooms for commercial purposes. I'm doing this full time. And I'm producing about 100 pounds a week, maybe a little bit more than that. I'm processing 400 pounds of sawdust substrates, like you see here behind me. So 40 of these 10-pound blocks each week. So that may sound like a lot if you don't grow mushrooms, or if maybe you just started growing some mushrooms, and it's quite a bit for one person to do. So at this time, it's just me. So I'm doing all the actual lab work and farm work myself. And then I have my wife to help me with some packaging and some inside sales. So we're fortunate to have a location where we can be open to the public. We've got kind of a storefront location here in Santa Cruz. So that's really helpful because, of course, it allows us to distribute directly to the public. People can just walk in, buy mushrooms, see our operation. So it's a real advantage for us. When I decided to start growing mushrooms myself, kind of as a hobby, I really didn't know much about it. I had been into foraging for mushrooms, going out into the woods, finding mushrooms, collecting them, identifying them. I love all kinds of mushrooms, so that really adds to the enjoyment of the experience naturally. After having been involved in it for a while, I got as a gift a little grow kit. It was a little shiitake grow kit, probably a 5-pound block. And it was from my wife's brother. He sent it to me for my birthday or something like that. So he knew that I was into mushrooms, so this is what he got me for a gift. It was really fun actually growing them myself. And it was my first experience of going through that process. And so the more I've learned about mushrooms, the more I've gotten involved with them, the more I've developed a passion for it. And before I knew it, I was growing more and more of them. There's a good agricultural community here in Santa Cruz. So there are some farm stands nearby, and actually started talking to some of these farm stands that were open to the public to see if they'd be interested in carrying some of my mushrooms. And I had one that did want to take them on, and we actually had a lot of success providing mushrooms there and them just selling them kind of on a consignment basis sort of a thing. We just worked out a deal where I told them, I guarantee you, you'll sell these mushrooms. If they get too old to where people won't buy them, I'll take them back and switch them out for free so that there's no risk to you. And by doing this, I was able to get top dollar. I was able to get my price, and then they were able to sell them for a couple bucks a basket, make a profit at no risk themselves. With produce, you're almost always wasting some, right? It goes bad, it gets thrown away. So that worked pretty well. You know, another thing I tried was a produce market. I tried providing them with mushrooms and kind of the same sort of a deal. And that didn't really work out. We just weren't communicating well. We didn't make a go of it, which is fine. And one of the great things about growing mushrooms, one of the things that you really have to be wired for if you're going to be a mushroom farmer is failure. And this is really true in any business, in any endeavor. You have to be tolerant of failure. If you're not willing to fail, you're really not going to make it far doing anything, because there's going to be some failure. that's the way you learn things. That's the way that you get experience. And not everything I've tried has worked. The great thing about mushrooms is the life cycle of a mushroom is so short. And the process goes so fast that your failures come very fast. And you know pretty quickly, oh, this didn't work. I've got contamination here. This didn't colonize. Something's wrong. And you're able to correct it pretty quickly and just keep the thing rolling. And that's one of the fun things about growing mushrooms. So when I decided I wanted to start growing them myself, not just getting a kit from some other farm, but actually making my own production blocks, I started doing some research, the way most people do nowadays. I went on the internet and watched videos. And actually, there was a friend of mine who we were hanging out together at the time that I was contemplating starting to really pursue growing mushrooms as a business. And he found this guy online. I think his name's Michael Crow. I think he's the owner of Southwest Mushrooms in Phoenix, Arizona. This has been 2 or 3 years ago now. But a friend of mine found this guy and said, hey, you need to watch this guy's videos. And I did. And this is the first guy who I really watched who was making videos talking about how to grow mushrooms. And I really liked the guy. The guy did a really good job at explaining the process and demonstrating it. You could see it was obvious that he had very high standards for cleanliness and preventing contamination, and was really good at explaining it too. Kind of a humble guy. He would kind of explain, this is how I do it, this is how some other people do it. I don't do it that way, but that's another way to do it. And it was kind of a method of teaching and explaining that I was used to. That's really how I sort of learned other crafts and trades in my life. It was really cool. It gave me kind of a head start on how to think about it, and really it was from other growers who were willing to share some of their experience on how they did it that allowed me to get involved and try it. But what I discovered is that the more involved I got in growing mushrooms, the more I loved it. And I started to realize that no matter how much time I spent doing it in a day, I was enjoying myself. I was really loving the process. And not all of it is that interesting. A lot of it is cleaning, a lot of it is repetitive stuff, but it didn't matter. I just loved it. And it became apparent after doing this for a year or two, really as a hobbyist, kind of semi-hobby, semi-farmer. I mean, once you start selling mushrooms, people, you're a farmer, even if it's on a small scale. So that's kind of where I was for the first couple of years, and just realized, yeah, this is something that I could do for work for as long as I want to work. There were some other people that I've watched. There's some channels on YouTube, and I'll put the links of those in the description here so that you can maybe follow them if you're interested. What I noticed was that there wasn't really any farmers who I really relate to and really identify with that were continuing to make these videos. And I totally understand it, because it takes some effort, it takes some time to shoot a video, and then there's the editing part of it. And if you want to make it look really professional, it takes even more time. So probably at a place where if someone's thinking about becoming a hobbyist or is a hobbyist, thinking about scaling up a little bit, I can probably offer some advice or some pointers and talk a little bit about, some of the pitfalls that I've had, which haven't really been that many. I've actually been pretty fortunate. It's gone pretty well. I've really taken to heart the idea of working in a very clean environment and trying to eliminate all contamination if possible. And I have very, very little contamination, even though I don't have any really high-tech facilities or anything. So that's worth noting. I got a comment on one of my videos. Someone was asking about growing mushrooms in tubs, and they wanted to know if I had any advice for them about that. I think people have pretty good success with that. What I learned and what I was exposed to early on was just this, growing in these bags using sawdust. And so just gourmet wood-loving mushrooms like lion's mane, various oysters, chestnut, shiitake, stuff like that. So that's really what I know how to grow. But regardless of what media you want to use, whether it's going to be, sawdust, or if you're going to want to try to grow on straw or some other type of substrate, what I recommend is just getting the experience of growing mushrooms. And I would highly recommend doing what I did, is start with a kit. Most mushroom farms will sell you a grow kit. They're usually about 5 pounds or so, right around there, of fully colonized sawdust that's ready to fruit. Then all you have to do is cut some slits in the bag. They'll grow. And doing this will give you a feel for the timing, what the pins look like, what the primordia looks like, how they develop, how long it takes them to develop, how big they get, and stuff like that. In fact, doing that and repeating that process a few times is a great idea, because then you'll get a chance to see what works well and what doesn't work well, and how long is too long to let mushrooms grow, because there are a lot of little details and a lot of nuance to growing mushrooms that you really can't explain, that you really can't learn in a book or even on a video. You have to really experience it and see it, get the feel of it, what it smells like. I'm not really an expert in probably any topic, and mushrooms is no exception. I don't think of myself as a mycologist. I think of myself as a mushroom farmer. I know enough about mycology to grow mushrooms, but I'm definitely not an expert. There are so many people who know so much more about it than I do. So if you're interested in that stuff, that information is definitely available. But this has been my experience, and this is how I've learned what I know about mushrooms. I started out foraging for mushrooms. So my first experience with mushrooms was finding mushrooms that were fully grown. So that's like the very end stage of the life cycle of a mushroom, right? The fruit itself, growing on a tree, growing on a log, growing on the forest floor. After learning how to identify mushrooms and the different types, and learning some of the Latin names, and learning a little bit about mycology and the different types of mushrooms, there are some mushrooms that you can grow, these kind that are saprotropes, because you can feed them and grow them, and then they'll just grow. Whereas these mycorrhizal type, you can't grow because they only occur in nature. They're wild mushrooms. So that was, one of the things that I learned, and just learning a little bit about mycology just as a forager gave me some insight into what to look for and how a mushroom looks when it's fresh, what it looks like after it's past that stage and it's no longer really good to eat. Learning the environment that I'm likely to find mushrooms in, and all of that was very helpful, but it was like the very end stage. So the next thing I learned was how to grow them from a block of sawdust that was already totally colonized and ready to fruit. So it's one step back from the very end, taking that colonized block and fruiting it. So I learned what that looked like, and actually there's a farm probably 20 miles away or something where I was able to go pick up some of their spent blocks. Now I don't know how many times they fruit their blocks, if it's once or twice, but you could go find, you could pay a fee and take as many of these used blocks as you wanted. And I would go get some, load them up in my car, bring them home, and try to create an environment that would allow them to fruit. And I started with, a tent and just a humidifier, just cutting slits in it or whatever to make sure there was enough fresh air for them to grow. And some of them would grow, and some of them wouldn't. There'd be contamination, but it was kind of one step closer to the source of creating mushrooms. So then the next logical step back from there is creating that substrate. And so this is the point where it becomes tricky, because in order to inoculate the substrate, you really need a clean environment. Really, a germ-free, almost sterile environment is ideal. And I didn't have any equipment, I didn't have a flow hood or anything like that. So I just figured out a workaround, and actually what I did was I took a little tent and a HEPA filter and used it to filter out the air in a little tent that I could stand in and just inoculate a few blocks at a time. So I was buying spawn from another farm, creating my own blocks, sterilizing them in a pressure cooker, and then standing in this little tent, getting it really clean, getting myself really clean, and inoculating these blocks, and had some success at that. Naturally, it wasn't super high efficiency, and there was, a pretty high incidence of contamination, because it was just kind of a janky little thing that I put together, but it was good enough to allow me to have some success in inoculating these substrates and growing them out. And so the next step back from that, of course, would be creating the spawn. Rather than buying the spawn from the farm, actually creating the spawn. And then I was buying liquid culture from another farm or another mycologist, using that liquid culture to inoculate my spawn, then using the spawn to inoculate my production blocks. Then I wanted to create my own liquid culture. So I was getting these liquid cultures and then expanding them in jars of broth. So learning how to make the broth, to expand out the liquid culture that I was using to inoculate my spawn. Then one step back from that is actually, making the petri dishes. So placing some culture on the plate, growing it out, learning to work with those. Probably the next stage would be cloning. Cloning is pretty easy to do. You can just take a mushroom, get a clean little clipping of it from inside of the mushroom that's sterile, get it onto a plate. You can get that process done in a sterile environment with no contamination. That the mycelium will grow out from just that little tissue sample. And then probably the next step backwards from that is growing from spores, which is pretty much, that's the beginning, right? It all starts with mushroom spores. most things you learn the building blocks, and then you build on it and build on it. And like if you wanted to learn a language, right, you learn the alphabet, learn the sounds of those letters, learn how to string those together into words, and words into little phrases, phrases into sentences, sentences into paragraphs. Learning mushrooms has been the exact opposite of that. I started at the end and worked my way backwards, because it actually becomes more complicated, more tricky. It requires more skill at the very beginning than it does at the very end. So to give you any advice about starting out as a hobbyist growing mushrooms, this is something that is very counterintuitive, and you wouldn't realize if someone didn't tell you this, I'm sure, that you really need to start at the end and work your way backwards to learn mycology. It's definitely doable, whether you want to be a big operation and have a huge farm growing tons and tons of mushrooms, or whether you just want to grow some mushrooms for your own use, you and your friends, whatever. I hope you find that information helpful and interesting, and I will continue to put out some videos like this. If at least a few people find it interesting and helpful, I'll continue to do it. So have a great day. Enjoy the mycology. Eat more mushrooms. They're good for you. We'll see you next time.